Hello again, and welcome to this episode of Chatting with the Lightkeeper. I'm Edward, and today we're going to talk about the accountability side of DS. Not like Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. It's not going to be that long, and I certainly hope that it will not be as boring as that book bored me when I had to read it. But accountability is something that is kind of a hallmark of a DS relationship. However things work or get worked in, normally there's an accountability that's built in. Oftentimes you see this as rules, and of course, if there's rule breaking, there's punishment. Those are the two most common terms tossed about in the world of DS when it comes to accountability. Um, and it's really about a dominant holding their submissive accountable for their actions or inactions. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Um, to start with, I would like to kind of extend a challenge. I see things a little differently. While I do believe in accountability, I dislike the word punish. To me, that always sounds like submissive did something terrible and deserves to go to DS prison. And, there's no DS prisons, thankfully. Uh, there were no crimes committed. In all likelihood, the submissive made a mistake. And yes, the dominant is holding them accountable for their mistake, but it's not punishment. It's not, they're not a 5-year-old who lied about something in kindergarten. It's just, I don't know, it just sounds so punitive. Um, I I prefer to say correct because that's what you're doing. You're holding the submissive accountable, but the idea is to correct the mistake. So going forward, we don't have the same mistake again, and we're helping the submissive um, grow, blossom, and do better the next time they get put in that same type of situation. And it's the same thing with rules. Rules are black and white. There's no there's no wiggle room. And unfortunately, and you'll excuse this bad pun, but life is colored in 50 shades of gray. It's not black and white. A situation that can present itself is a submissive has made the commitment to their dominant that they will check in with them from work, say every day at 2:30 in the afternoon. Well, one fine day, the submissive's boss pulls them aside, puts them in a meeting, and that meeting runs long, and it's now 2:45 in the afternoon when the submissive gets out of the meeting. And they immediately check in with their dominant, but because a rule is black and white, the dominant in a way, and then there are some dominants who do act like this, and I'm not saying it's wrong or right. There's a million different ways to do DS, and what works for you is fantastic. But because the rule was broken, the submissive will be held accountable for breaking the rule, even though it wasn't that they forgot to do the check-in. It wasn't like they had an opportunity to check in before the meeting. It just happened. So that's why I prefer to use guidelines, because in the real world, the submissive checked in just as soon as they could. The reason why they weren't able to check in at the scheduled time was out of their control, and they reached out and did what they were supposed to do as soon as life allowed them to. So I think guidelines kind of allow for real life to happen. And that's kind of what we're talking about here in the series, is how DS and real life intersect, collide, and sometimes things don't work as well as they do when we imagine how things are going to work prior to actually experiencing uh, DS in real life. So that's kind of the goal of this 3 podcast series that we're starting the halfway point here with the first half of episode 2 on this. And so we're going to talk about the accountability, and part of the accountability side of things. Um, and accountability kind of comes in 2 ways. First, a dominant submissive sitting down and creating their rules or guidelines for the relationship, what's acceptable, what's expected, um, those types of things. Whether it's a bedtime or whatnot, all of the things that are in the guideline area should be things that benefit the submissive. Uh, they shouldn't be whenever Danny Dominant gets home from work, submissive will automatically give them the sexual favor of their desire. That's not really something that benefits the relationship. But for example, if the submissive has a tendency to run late to work, perhaps there's a guideline in place that the submissive is expected to arrive at work 10 minutes before they're supposed to be there, to curtail the tardy issue. But whatever it is, it's something that's designed to enhance, to benefit the submissive's life. And the other part of that too is often sitting down and as a dominant talking with the submissive about what they want to achieve in life, creating goals for not only the relationship but just life in general, and working with their submissive to help them achieve goals. So either way you want to look at both of those things, the guideline aspect or creating goals, it's important that that both the dominant and submissive are smart when they talk about, and this should be a joint discussion. This shouldn't be dominant demanding that the submissive will do, especially if the submissive is very resistant to it. It needs to be something that is mutually agreeable. Yes, there are things that a dominant may see that are things that they feel are imperative, but they should also be things that they should be able to, through discussion, convince the submissive to be on the same page with. It shouldn't be the dominant thumping their chest and saying this is what will happen. And I know that there are probably some that disagree with that, and perfectly fine, but it really needs to be a team creation when it comes to creating smart goals and smart guidelines. And SMART, the other part of that, is a wonderful little acronym that really kind of helps clarify how to do it in a manner that will be beneficial. First, when you're setting these up, it's important to be specific so that there's no being vague or fuzziness. It's very specific. And so that way, you know, there's the submissive isn't feeling like they are doing the right thing, doing what's expected, and the dominant feeling that they aren't doing what is expected because it was very vague, and the dominant's definition and the submissive's definition of what was expected are completely different things. So it needs to be very specific. So there's the S in SMART. And now we're on to M. And M is for measurable. It needs to be something that you can measure, whether it's right or wrong. If it's a long range goal, that the progress is measurable, something that's easy to quantify, so that it's specific and it's measurable. And the next part of being smart with setting up guidelines and goals is that whatever is decided, that is achievable, that it's not some pie in the sky fantasy. It's a very achievable outcome. The preferred outcome is something that's achievable. Um, let's say a submissive wants to get healthier in the next year. I think that's a lot of people have probably made that a resolution for this year, is to be healthier than they were the year before. So let's say a submissive says, I want to run the Boston Marathon in 2024. So that's what we're going to work on. That they want, they approach the dominant that they want to work on having this goal of the 2024 Boston Marathon. And that sounds great. That's a year away, time to train, time to prepare. Except it's really not achievable, especially if the submissive isn't a runner. Perhaps starting with going from the couch to a 5K would be a more achievable thing because the Boston Marathon, even though it's open to thousands, it's something that you actually have to earn your place. You can't just, write a check to someone and, oh, here's your Boston Marathon entry. It's something that you actually have to achieve to get there. So it starts with making the goal achievable. So perhaps the Boston Marathon is a long range goal, but making the steps to get there achievable will be key. And that's the same with setting guidelines. You want to make sure that they're achievable guidelines. You don't want to continuously uh, be, as a submissive, either feel like you're failing because you can't meet the guidelines, or as a dominant, you don't want to put your submissive into a situation that is kind of predetermined that they're not going to succeed. Even if you are a sadistic dominant, you still want to see your submissive succeed. You don't want to be knocking them down. You want to be lifting them up. It's what good dominants do. They lift their submissives up. And the other thing too is the rules and guidelines. They need to be relevant to real life. Sometimes things are not really relevant. Say you want to write a symphony. Well, that's really not relevant to life if you've never played an instrument. You can't really sit down and write a symphony. So you just have to make sure that whether the guideline or the rule or goal is relevant to what's going on in life. And the other thing that's important to do is making sure that everything that is agreed to is timely. That there's a process to do it in a timely fashion. It's not something that okay, the submissive is having trouble being on time to work. Well, it's timely in a way, but you want to make sure that the guideline is done in a timely manner, not something that will take effect in 6 months. June 1st will come back to it, and it's the first of the year now, so you have until June 1st to get your act together. No, it's one thing to say, it's something we'll talk about every day for the next 30 days, but during that kind of 30-day grace period while we're working on this, 10 minutes early is the new on time, there's going to be no correction or punishment if you don't meet it. It's going to be something that we're going to work on together for 30 days before the accountability standard comes in. So you want to make sure that it's all timely and relevant. So, and just a couple of more notes. Dominants should never correct or punish their submissive when they're angry at their submissive. It's one thing if something happens in a relationship uh, where a rule or guideline is broken that upsets the dominant. It's human nature. It's understandable to get upset. But when a dominant is upset like that, the best thing to do is to express to the submissive that they will be held accountable, that you're upset at the moment, and so you need to kind of bring yourself down a little bit before you bring the accountability portion into play. So that is very important. And if a submissive encounters a dominant who wants to correct or punish while they are enraged, upset, whatever the word is, that would be a red flag that dominant needs to kind of work on controlling their emotions. So it's it's important for dominants to be in a balanced state when they are in, doing the correcting or the punishment of their submissive, that they are not allowing their emotions to kind of rule the roost. Humans were emotional, so sometimes a dominant needs to say, yes, I am going to hold you accountable, but I need to process this first, or I need to process through my emotions before we have the discussion about correction and how we're going to go forward. And notice with this, I'm saying we, because it is a joint project. It is not just the dominant saying this is what's going to happen. It is a process that needs to be a joint process. The submissive has to be involved. The submissive, whether they like it or not, they do need to understand it, understand what's happening, and also, in a way, be buying into the the fact that they made a mistake, and this is going to be the repercussions for the mistake. So the other thing dominants also need to do, that sometimes is hard to find, especially online. But the dominants need to hold themselves accountable to the same things that they expect from their submissive. We talked about the submissive struggling with being on time at work. So if that dominant who is working with that submissive to see that they are prompt at work happens to arrive late to work themselves, it's important that they hold themselves accountable for that mistake while they're working with their submissive. Let's say that dominant said to the submissive as a correction, I want you to write, I will be on time every day, front and back side of a standard notebook piece of paper, as a way to potentially correct the problem, have them write lines. So it would also be appropriate for that dominant, if they did the same thing, to not only tell the submissive, hey, I was late to work today. Not only was I late to work today, here's my page of lines, just like I had you do yesterday. So that dominant is showing to the submissive that they are going to abide by the same standards that they expect of their submissive. Being a dominant is not kind of like some of the old westerns, the way the cowboys sort of treated their ladies. It was not it. Some of those movies make it seem like it's a do as the cowboy says, not as they do world. And there's some of that kind of spills over, I think, into the DS lifestyle. So it's important that dominants hold themselves to the same exacting standards that they expect of their submissives. And if a dominant takes the misstep and that misstep would result in them correcting their submissive, that they show their submissive that they in fact made the same error, and they are holding themselves to the same standards that they expect out of their submissive. It's common sense, and I think it will go a long way to making any corrections that dominant may have to do with their submissive even more impactful, because the submissive knows that their dominant holds themselves to the exact same standards that they're holding their submissive to. So on that note, it's time for a standard break to hear from the sponsor. And so after the break, we'll be right back to continue on with stories of crime and punishment. All right, welcome back. And as we're talking about the crime and punishment in DS, when it comes to the actual correcting or punishing, depending on the verbiage that you use and what works for you, the accountability side, um, there should be a process that is similar every time something happens where there needs to needs to be a mistake has been made, and there needs to be some accountability. The process needs to be consistent, just like the accountability needs to be consistent in the relationship. It's very important to have the consistency. There's many ways to do it. One suggestion is this, to start with just a discussion. What happened? Talk about what happened, why it happened, what was the why behind it, because a lot of times the why is very important to understand. And if you're a dominant, before you before you hold your submissive accountable, dominant needs to make sure that the failure or the mistake the submissive made wasn't caused by the fact that the rule or guideline that was broken, um, that it wasn't an error on the D type's fault. Like they didn't craft the craft the guideline properly. That's what led to it. And also at the same time, is it something that needs to be tweaked? So that it's better should there be a next time. Um, Another thing that needs to happen is that whatever the correction is going to be, it needs to be discussed with the submissive. Now, I'm not suggesting that a dominant is going to let their submissive top from the bottom, especially when it comes to correction. But you need to talk about it with the submissive. This is what happened. Um, and we'll use the example of writing lines again. I would like you to write lines because this happened. And ask the submissive, perhaps, what do you think or how do you feel about this? It's important to have the submissive buy in to the correction. It's not just, you were naughty, here's your naughty punishment, and you will do this now because I said so. It's important to have the discussion, and something that I believe dominants will notice when they have this discussion with their submissive, odds are the submissive is probably going to have a correction that is sterner in mind than what the dominant has in mind. Submissives often are very hard on themselves. And I think that as a dominant, you need to be maybe benevolent or kind, just a little. You need to understand that the submissive has already punished themselves mentally for the mistake. They have beaten themselves up in their mind because of whatever it is that happened. And no matter how you hold the submissive accountable, that process of what's going on in their mind is deeper and more intense than any correction that the dominant could rationally think of. So I think it's important to understand that if you're a dominant, the submissive is already mentally berated, punished themselves, um, or continuing to do so, and it's important to recognize that and respect that the submissive feels horrible. Oftentimes, it's very very hard or hardest on a submissive when they realize that they've made a mistake. For example, being on time to work, and for whatever reason, I mean that's one thing that unless dominant and submissive work together, the dominant is relying on the submissive to tell them, "Hey, I was late for work today," and the submissive having to go and tell the dominant that is more of a punishment or more of a correction than anything the dominant could think of, because the submissive is having to come to their dominant, tell them that they made a mistake, tell them that they screwed up, and it's a very deep process for a submissive. So I think that dominants would be surprised to learn just how intense those emotions can be in a submissive. So I think it's very kind of important to talk through the correction, and in a way of talking it through, you're also soothing and calming the submissive's mind, because that's very, very important to do. Um, and another thing that happens in the lifestyle, and this should be a huge red flag, is there are some folks who identify as a dominant who will also throw this lovely gem out there. And it's when I am correcting you or when I am punishing you, these are typically dominants who are punishers. If you can, I don't know, superhero, I guess, cartoon character, the Punisher, perhaps, um, is a cartoon or a graphic novel, maybe somewhere that character is coming to mind. But these dominants very much are, when the submissive makes a mistake, they will punish. And when they punish, it's physical. Whether it's spanking, belt, flogger, whip, whatever, it's a physical, hands-on punishment. Now, there's nothing wrong with physical punishment, hands-on, as long as it's done safely, sanely, and even though it is a correction, it is still needs to be consensual. It still needs, the submissive has to consent to it, which means the punishers who say they do not have to respect any safe words during punishment or correction, that is taking consent out of it, and therefore it is crossing into abuse. That's what it is. They are using this as an excuse to abuse. So if you encounter submissives or switches or other dominants, if you encounter somebody who says this, you are encountering someone who is hiding in the lifestyle that is an abuser, pure and simple. So please know that, and know that red flag. And submissives, if you hear that from a prospective dominant, run away, and tell your friends to stay away. So safe words are always relevant because everything in the lifestyle happens with consent, including punishment or correction. So it is important to know that. So just, as a word of caution, avoid those who somehow try to not link safe words and consent to correction, because they definitely, definitely must be consented to. And it's important to also realize that as a dominant, because submissives internalize a mistake the way that they typically do, obviously not all, everyone is unique, but since the submissive is probably beating themselves up, it's very important that when the process of punishment or correction is done, that the dominant reinforces that they love, cherish, and admire their submissive. Don't ever use feelings or love as a weapon. It shouldn't be weaponized. Like, I mean, in a way, you are correcting the submissive because you care so deeply about them. This is not a time to withhold love or affection. Um, and also, it's an important time to remind your submissive that you're, as a dominant, that you're proud of them. You're proud to be with them. They make you happy. They make you a better person. You want to reinforce that, even though this negative thing has just happened, and we've corrected the problem, you want to reinforce, all the positive things about the relationship. You don't want to make it feel like this negative event is going to be a dark cloud hanging over things. It is very important that when a misstep is corrected, it's water under the proverbial bridge. It's happened, it's done, and it's gone, and the relationship's going forward. Uh, please, no passive aggressive behavior or using that great corporate conference line or conference call word, circle back. Don't circle back and say, hey, remember 2 months ago when you were late for work? And don't ever do that. Once something is corrected, it's corrected and the relationship is moving forward. Now, many dominants kind of have physical things as their go-to manner for correcting or punishing their submissive. Spankings, uh, all sorts of hands-on physical corrections, and definitely not saying those are wrong at all. Whatever works for a relationship works. But there are some alternatives to the actual physical correcting, which I think could use kind of a refresher because sometimes it's better to engage mentally than it is to engage physically. So, just some ideas that may or may not work for a partnership, but dominance can take away perhaps TV or video game time. No watching that show you watch every week, or no continuing to binge watch. Whatever it is that you're binging for so many days. Perhaps um, you have to, the submissive has to eat Brussels sprouts for lunch and they can't stand Brussels sprouts. Now, because this is going out on the internet, and well, we all know the internet has a unique twat waffle world. When I say a food not liked, I am not talking about a food that might be harmful or the submissive has an allergy to or anything idiotic like that. It's a food that they may not care for. Um, but also something that is in the process of that is going to be healthy. For example, Brussels sprouts. Brussels sprouts, unless you have some Brussels sprout allergy. I wish I had thought of that when I was a kid, and that was the vegetable with dinner. Oh, I can't have those because I'm allergic, Mom. Unfortunately, my young brain didn't think like that. But consider something like that. You have to have those Brussels sprouts or whatever that food is. Maybe it's carrots, or maybe it's peas, or potatoes, or who knows. A disliked vegetable, we'll call it. Or maybe they're a Starbucks in the morning kind of person. So for the next week, you can't have your morning Starbucks. Now, there are people that need caffeine to function, so perhaps you change the Starbucks to a lesser quality caffeine stop so they can still get their caffeine. They just can't quite get the they can still get their caffeine fix, but not the gourmet caffeine fix, shall we say? Um, or go 24 hours where they have water as their only choice. They can't have that coffee for 24 hours, all the water you want. Um, Another good one is since the Christmas season just recently passed, I'm sure we've all seen the movie A Christmas Story. You'll shoot your eye out, kid. Well, there's a scene where the Ralphie, I believe is his name in the movie, says a dirty word and ends up with a bar of soap in his mouth. Well, if your submissive, for example, says a dirty word or perhaps is sassy, bratty, pull out the bar of soap. Here you go. Um, if they enjoy reading, but maybe they don't enjoy reading the same things you do, I will freely admit that I am a history geek. And many of the books I read would probably bore most of you to pieces. Hey, there's a great idea for a submissive. Okay, you have to read this book, which the dominant has read, and he or she knows that their submissive has no interest in the subject matter, will find the book boring. Have the submissive read the book and write a good old fashioned review on it. That's another thing. If they're a late night person, have them go to bed early. If they're an early to rise person, maybe make them sleep in. Writing lines. Um, we already talked about that. Another thing, write a paper. You have the submissive write a paper on what happened, why it happened, and why it won't happen again. Another idea, perhaps a certain amount of time, a timeout or corner time. While this is kind of a physical one, but have this submissive kneel on some uncooked rice for a certain amount of time. And with this one, dominance, um, just once again, try this out yourself beforehand so you have an idea of, because it is much more demanding physically than it sounds. So while probably wouldn't be super sexy, dominance, for your submissive to catch you kneeling on some rice to try and figure out what it feels like, please definitely do that first if you're going to assign that. Perhaps take away their internet, unless it's work or school related. Can't be online for 24 hours, 48 hours, whatever it is. Um, kind of go along with the time in the corner. Hold a coin to the wall with their nose for a specific set of time, and if the coin falls, you got to restart the clock. So those are just some ideas that are out there rather than using a physical method. Sometimes those are more impactful than impacts. So just something to consider. Just speaking for myself, when I was younger, but I was so much older than, forget it, I won't try and do the Bob Dylan lyric. I was so much younger then, I'm older than, or I'm so much older then, I'm younger than that now, however it goes, Bob Dylan. But when I was a more youthful dominant, I used to say that I wouldn't spank as a form of correction because so many people, so many submissives like to be spanked. And so I would look for other methods. But I did learn that there are times when a spanking works. There definitely is a difference between spanking for punishment, which, if you don't know, punishment just means kind of a role play fun scenario, almost where yes, the submissive may be naughty or bad, but it's done in a way, done in a role play type setting. So the spanking or the physical play that comes out of that is all in good fun. It is not actually a correction. But sometimes there is a time and a place for a spanking or an implement. Um, whether it be a hand, flogger, wooden spoon, whatever it is. But there is a time and a place for it. So even if you kind of feel the way I used to, that spanking is not necessarily an effective tool for correcting, there is a time and a place for it as well. Um, so it's important to know that there are, if you are somebody who does choose to use physical, impactful means to correct a submissive, to consider alternatives. And if you are somebody who does more of the alternative ways of correcting rather than hands on, that you understand too that there's a time and a place for both. It's a matter of balance and finding what works because life will throw curves. It's very important to understand that correcting a submissive is something that, as a dominant, can become hard when real life starts to kind of impact the relationship. Using the example of submissive late for work, when a dominant has a submissive come to them and say, "Hey, I screwed up today. I was late for work," and the dominant can see just how hard it is for the submissive to come forward and to share that, especially when the dominant is in love with their submissive. It can be very easy for a dominant to say, "I see how much this is affecting you, and I can see how hard it was for you just to come and tell me this, that would be punishment enough. And in theory, it is punishment enough, because whatever correction the dominant does at this point is going to pale in comparison to just the process of the submissive coming forward to share what had happened, and that was a violation of their guidelines. So this is one of those things where it can be a challenge for a dominant to be consistent with their correcting because they see how hard it was for their submissive to share what had happened. But this is also one of those challenges that a dominant needs to, okay, this happened, and I can see that this was very hard for you, submissive, to come and forward and share this with me. And I feel horrible that it happened, but we still have to go through the process, and it's important to have that process. We still have to go through the correction process with this. Um, so I think it's important to have that process, to work through the process, and even when it's a loving DS relationship. Submissive is madly in love with their dominant. Dominant's madly in love with their submissive, and the dominant can see how much it hurts for the submissive just to have to share that they had a mistake today. They still need to hold them accountable, and that is probably the hardest part of the accountability side of DS for a dominant is when they see just how hard the submissive is trying, working, and holding themselves to the standards and really wanting to make their dominant proud, and how disappointed the submissive is in them. And in a way, the submissive might even be afraid that the dominant feels let down by their mistake. Uh, it can be very easy for a dominant to let it slide this one time, and then the next time it slides, and the next time it slides, and slowly the accountability slips out of the relationship. And since the accountability is a hallmark of a DS relationship, I'm not saying every DS relationship has accountability, but the vast majority do. And if it starts to slide little by little, then it's very hard to. It's slid 3 times, and now suddenly the dominant's going to hold them accountable. But then the next 4 times they don't hold them accountable, then they do. Suddenly the DS component starts to break apart in the relationship. And since the DS is one of the pillars of the relationship, that pillar's starting to crack, and it can lead to a lot of issues to work through. So it's very important for a dominant to be consistent with their corrections and holding their submissive accountable. And submissives also, you have to understand that your dominant, especially if it's a loving dominant, a sensual dominant, they love you, you love them, and you notice that the accountability side is perhaps not being as consistent, rather than letting it slide. Have that conversation with your dominant, and start to let them know that you're seeing this little bit slipping, and how important it is that they hold you accountable, in addition to what you had to go through to tell them. So it's very important to not let the accountability side slide in a DS relationship, because life, and especially when love gets involved, it can and does happen. And love is a wonderful thing, but together in a partnership, when a dominant and a submissive partner together, that that is it's a team effort. The correction side of everything, it really is a team effort. While the submissive may not wanted to have made the mistake, they'll work with their dominant if they see the accountability starting to slip. And not only that, the dominant needs to work to always hold the submissive accountable, but the dominant also has to hold themselves accountable to the same things they expect from their submissives. And it's just very important to be a life partner and work together on life and DS. And yeah, so I hope that makes a little bit of sense. But the accountability side is one of the challenges, especially as a DS relationship becomes longer term and the feelings get more intense. It can be something that starts to slide, and when it starts to slide, little by little, the rest of the DS thing kind of starts to slide, and yet that's a foundation. So one of your foundations of the relationship is slipping off, and it can lead to a whole mess of trouble. So it's something that everybody needs to work on to make it work. So thank you for sharing this time together while we talked about the accountability side of a DS partnership and the challenges that life and the slippage that can happen there can bring. Um, if you are listening through Spotify's mobile app, I'd love your feedback on the question of what has been the most effective way for you to either give a correction or to be corrected, and just why do you think that has been so impactful for you? So, if you're on Spotify mobile, please share your feedback, and also there's a short survey there, so feel free to answer that. That's quick and easy. So thank you for listening. Please don't forget to click the follow button wherever you do get your podcast and are listening to this so you don't miss the next episode of Chatting with a Lightkeeper when we have our final chat about DS in real life. And that'll be talking about where the rubber meets the road. So until then, stay safe, stay warm, and look forward to chatting with you soon. Thank you.